Neighborhoods matter. These disaggregated neighborhoods matter. But what matters about them, I think, most is the parents and the environments they shape together. It's the assortment of parents together. It's their social interaction.
Thank you for joining us for a new edition of the Perfectus podcast. My name is Gonzalo Schwartz. I'm the founder and CEO of the Archbridge Institute, the home of Perfectus magazine. This podcast marks the beginning of a short series of conversations we're releasing on the economics of human flourishing. At Archbridge, we define the economics of flourishing as the study of how markets, people, organizations, institutions support the economic foundations of social mobility and human flourishing. And for our inaugural podcast in this series, I'm excited and honored to start with two excellent economists who specialize specifically in this field. First, we'll have Dr. James Heckman, who is the Henry Schultz Distinguished Service Professor in the College at the University of Chicago. He's also the Director of the Center for the Economics of Human Development and a Senior Fellow with the Archbridge Institute. Jim won the 2000 Nobel Laureate Prize in Economics for his work on the macroeconometrics of diversity and heterogeneity for establishing a sound causal basis for public policy evaluation. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you.
And we also have the delighted to have Rasmus Landersø, who's a research professor at the Rockwool Foundation Research Unit in Denmark. Dr. Landerso has received his PhD in economics from Aarhus University, and he has been a visiting scholar at the University of Chicago, and he's an associate editor of the Journal of Human Capital. And together with Jim, they conduct great scholarship on social mobility, comparing rates of mobility and between the United States and Denmark, which will be one of the main focuses of this conversation, but we'll delve into much more as well. Thank you very much for joining us, Rasmus. And to kick us off, Jim, and you don't necessarily have to build on the definition that I mentioned, but as a pioneer, I think, in focusing on the economics of human flourishing, how would you define the field?
Well, I think the idea of human flourishing, at least in Western thought, goes back to Aristotle, if not earlier. And that is the idea of human beings developing themselves to the fullest potential and giving and providing environments where they can express their potential, they can manage their lives in a way that's effective and that is creative and productive. So key in Aristotle is virtue and the idea of being, honorable and creating what would be probably called a civil society and a civil society, not just a group of affiliates, but people who basically interact in a positive and constructive way. Though in the society at large, Aristotle emphasized the social nature of the human being and also the way that we think of as the interaction in the family. And so it's this process of becoming human, interactions and providing a fulfilled lives. So a life, I guess I would call a life worth living, but a life that's challenging, that at the same time is rewarding, personally rewarding, and fulfills a set of values that are internal, not externally set, but values that are internally held by the individual. I don't know, what's your value? What's your notion of human flourishing?
Well, I think that perhaps a bit less ambitious. I won't go back to Aristotle. Yeah, but I think that both growing up, developing, living to your full potential, both in social terms, in terms of whether it's education-wise, whether it's skill formation, in terms of aspirations, and also, I guess, in terms of own values about how you should be as a human being, how you should be again towards each other, towards others. I think that's at least what I understand with it.
Yeah, the social aspect is something that gets neglected in certain kinds of very individualistic, I would even argue maybe narcissistic studies. But so the full development of a human being is not just happiness in a very isolated sense, but happiness in a larger sense in which you interact and you gain, but also a sense of pleasure, but a sense of responsibility towards yourself and towards others as well. It's fulfilling.
Yeah.
And it's that feedback from society. It's the enjoyment and the engagement and the feeling of being alive. There was a psychologist here at Chicago for many years. I don't know if he's still alive, but he's not here in Chicago anymore. So that means he's intellectually dead. Sorry, shouldn't have said that. But his name was Csikszentmihalyi, and he wrote a book called Flow. And the book about flow is exactly the sense of engagement with life. And I think that gives some aspect of human flourishing. It's the sense of being involved in the moment, but being involved also in something serious, not being involved in just personal pleasure in a very hedonistic sense, but deep personal things that are of value and that you value too.
Yeah, and that involves taking action, as we were just talking before.
Exactly.
Outside of the call, having the agency to pursue it.
Reciprocal actions and
Mhm.
responsibilities towards the family, towards the community at large, and representing this kind of broader notion of what you're part of the society, you're linked to the society has obligations to you and you to the society, but understanding that and having a sense of place and at the same time a sense of development within that place. So
Yeah, no, that's excellent, and that's sort of a great segue for the next question, because as we were discussing that, and it came a little bit in that answer, that there's an important role for the family and for engagement by people, by engagement from the parents. And I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you think parental engagement and family structure plays that role for flourishing, for social mobility, and why do you think maybe that topic, as I've come to see it lately, has become so politicized, and maybe that politicization is what maybe one of the main things that stands in the way of people recognizing the importance of these issues for a fulfilling lives, having the family structure
again,
and
I don't
parental
want to
engagement.
keep appealing to Aristotle, but Aristotle certainly saw value of the family, but he's hardly alone. Plato was emphasizing it, but in a negative way. He wanted to get rid of family influence. He wanted orphanages. His dream was Sparta, really, in some ways, where kids were just detached from the family. I think the importance of the family has been recognized from time immemorial. But I think as we come to understand it better, we see probably even more than before how important it was and is. The family engages with the child and does it in multiple ways, not just in terms of holding the child and feeding the child and making sure the child's physical needs are met, but in terms of engaging the child, teaching the child, speaking to the child, and doing things with the child that are really very, very active engagement. And what Vygotsky, the Russian psychologist, described as a scaffolding. So the building up of a person, we've really come to, and we develop along similar lines, but in different ways, in the following sense, that people develop more slowly and more rapidly, and we have multiple skills, and those develop by practice, and they also develop by experimentation. And it's the value of experimentation. The family is, in the end, the great laboratory for young children to experiment. We basically set up a framework. They can essentially try new things. We encourage them to try. They fail. And if they fail, we encourage them and say, okay, look, you tried, you failed, but here's maybe a better way. It's that kind of interaction, that kind of scaffolding, which plays a very fundamental role for the family. And when the family's not as engaged, the child simply doesn't develop. Literally, there's studies that are now done in extreme cases, like Ceausescu's Romanian infants, and back 20 years ago, when Ceausescu had the scheme in greater Romania to develop remodel the Romanian population and to encourage fertility, he set up orphanages so that the women could have kids, and then the kids would go to orphanages, and then the mothers would continue to work. And so the kids grew up in orphanages without any stimulation. And literally, they only had nurses feeding them, and they weren't even turned in the cribs and so forth. So the kids ended up with flat heads, and they ended up, but most importantly, their brains didn't fully develop, and their bodies didn't develop. They didn't develop the functioning attributes that we think of as being a flourishing human being. And so if they stayed in that environment long enough, it's very difficult to teach them how to even speak and how to communicate in a normal way. Now, those are extreme circumstances, but the family essentially plays a vital role. And the interesting thing about it is that most parents don't realize how important their role is. They kind of take it for granted because in their own circumstance, usually a lot of kids, were taken for granted by their own parents. So their parents didn't really go through as the parents did something for them, but they don't know quite what it was. And the parents themselves weren't that actively informed. So I think the family is the core of society, and it's the core of human development. And it's completely politicized these days, at least in the United States, because of the race question. In the US, we have like 80% of African American kids being born out of wedlock to single parent families being raised in homes where the family has little income, the mother's not very highly educated, and the stimulation is very low, and it has lasting lifetime consequences. And study after study after study shows these correlations. And even causal evidence now is being found in the following sense, that when we give stimulation to children, we take children who are deprived in one way or another and give them a mother or mothering and interaction and affection, the things that parents do, we see huge improvement in the life of the children.
Thanks, Jim.
Well,
And
well,
to build on,
Can I add
oh,
one thing?
sorry, go ahead, Rasmus.
So even though that, I mean, I completely agree with you, but and also in terms of different programs improving, but I think that still our knowledge about a smoking gun is not, I would say, fully realized yet. It's not like we have the perfect recipe.
No,
So we know that the family is important, but we can't say that, it's just a matter of precisely a teaspoon of this and then 5 ounces of this.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, if we knew the ingredients, then I guess we could
and
make those problems.
and I think this is what troubles me about the whole enterprise, about the family, is that, as is always true about everything in human study. There are a group of people who think they have all the answers. They know exactly. And usually they have something to sell you. Some program, some protocol, some study or other that they've done themselves. And the problem with that is that the ingredients are still to be determined. So Rasmus is perfectly right. We're just starting to understand the process of learning. This famous French neuroscientist, Dehaene, who's at the Collège de France, is showing exactly how learning shapes the brain in a fundamental way, how neurons are displaced and reinforced by different types of activities. And that's giving us a clue as to how we can devise effective learning schemes. So I think we're just on the cusp of really being able to understand. So we're learning a lot about learning. And I completely agree, though. We're far. I can't tell you, you must do A, B, and C. Although I promise you, there are literally maybe hundreds of programs, certainly scores of them, who will tell you, this is it. I don't want to mention names, but I've been a little bit horrified in the past that I've worked on certain types of programs, and I've shown they're effective. And then people, as soon as they find they're effective, they say, I must copy that program. And I say, no, wait, I didn't say that. Nobody said that. We want to find features of those programs. So some recent work that I've done with Jorge Garcia in a book, on a paper that just came out in the annual review, we showed that all of the successful programs have the ingredient of stimulating the parent to interact with the child. And it's that stimulation that plays a fundamental role. And so I feel that is the ingredient. But I'm imposing my view. I think it's Vygotsky again. It's the idea of stimulation. But we're starting to measure it. We're starting to measure the consequences of it. We know that in the absence, it's disastrous. But what the form of the stimulation remains to be developed. And new technologies exist so that we're going to be able to personalize the observation of the child in a way that wasn't possible 100 years ago. I mean, I was just visiting my daughter out in California a few weeks ago, and there was the baby going to sleep. And they had monitoring technology on the baby. You probably have that for your own kid. And you could see whether the kid was asleep or not and what was going on. And it was something that was unthinkable, like when I was a little kid, I'm sure. And with it, then that means you can find out where the child's at, where you can take the child the next step, how the child is doing, and so forth. And we've also come to understand the importance of letting the child explore, experimentation on the part of the child. And this part, I think, is very difficult. Is in the U.S. anyway. We have this notion. So we have some group of parents who don't show any interest in their children, and then we show another group of kids, or parents, I should say, who evaluate their children. They call helicopter parents, right? They're
Yes.
hovering over the child constantly. They have no room for exploration, no room for some kind of discussion. And I think that's a huge negative as well. So the kid has to be able to fail and be able to take his or her own steps. Anyway,
Yes.
that's my
Definitely.
addition to what he was saying, but I think it's important.
Excellent. And but speaking about learning, Rasmus, what have you learned, and what have you both learned in your work comparing mobility rates in Denmark and the United States? What are the main findings that you've had from the papers that you've done?
Well, I think that I guess starting out, I had a sense of that things weren't equal in Denmark, depending on your background. And I remember sitting in your class, I guess.
Years ago.
At least a decade ago now. And you showed results for the US, and I just remember saying that I bet the pattern is the same for Denmark. I don't know whether the difference in the magnitude is going to be the same, but yeah. And then we started looking at it, and it turned out to be the case. Yeah, that certainly that was what we found, and that begged the next question in terms of, I mean, that many of the policies that are in place in Denmark are what is pointing to in countries like the US to be sort of the magical solution, to be the exact ingredients missing. So that could be redistribution of income, it could be education expenses, and so forth. But that's all sort of partialed out in Denmark, because I mean that's policies that has been introduced.
Yeah.
But it turned out that there were still large discrepancies in terms of how people do throughout life, depending on your parental background. And that basically, I guess, just set out the projects that we've been working on since. So basically, trying to say, okay, if it's not the policies as such, or at least redistribution of income, it closes income gaps. But if we still see, say, differences in educational attainment, then what are the underlying causes? What are the underlying differences there? And I think we've interesting results, and we think we have important results in that regard, but we don't have the definitive answer, that we don't have a smoking gun in that sense. And then I would say a final thing, which may be a bit boring aspect of Denmark, is just the data. And that's also not only Denmark, but the Nordic country generally, is that it's not only kind of a laboratory in terms of the different policies in place in that country, but also that all of the, say, individual level income is measured and has been so for decades. Education, so all of the different components that we want to study, we can basically look at across both. I mean, between individuals, between families, between neighborhoods, schools, even employee matches, whatnot. And I think that has been a tremendous source of inspiration, and also knowledge throughout the years. Though there's still more to come, hopefully.
But I will express my frustration. I am amazed personally, but I'm also amazed by how many people aren't amazed. I mean, I find places even like the Wall Street Journal and a lot of more conservative outlets, but even generally like the New York Times, people insist on these programs, which have counterparts in Denmark, and they're not doing what they claim to be doing. There is something else going on, and why that's happening is really important to understand what social mobility is. So the fact that I was shocked when Rasmus, I was shocked for two reasons. He got the answers almost immediately. I mean, he was in the classroom, right? And you got the numbers, because he could use the census from Denmark immediately. I mean, he had access to this massive treasure trove of data, far richer than anything in the United States, far richer. And in a country like the United States, with a free housing market, a lot of choice, a highly educated population, in many ways comparable, but with minorities and with some of the same problems we have, not to the same degree and not the same problem exactly. But the point is that finding that these programs which give equality, I mean, it's equal expenditure in schools, it's equal expenditure in childcare, all children, right? All parents have free childcare. You get free preschool. You're getting free health care. I mean, it's like a whole litany of things. And even back now, this is 8 years ago, when the presidential primaries were being held, people like Sanders and Clinton and others were going forward. Every one of those candidates held out Denmark as the kind of ideal social democracy that we should emulate. I mean, there was a headline in the New York Times saying that the American dream is being lived in Denmark, right? Something like that. That's not quite the right headline. And I think a lot of people believe that. I believe that. I thought this is I just wanted to see what feature of these programs really promoted equality. And then we came across these results, and Rasmus really did these results, to be honest. These are his results. And out of it, I learned a tremendous amount. And I still think I don't think I fully understand it. We think we're starting to understand it, but it's beginning, but it's not just a government program.
Yeah.
We have ingredients, though. I mean, this goes back to Max Weber, and it goes back to many other people. The bureaucratic welfare state has, back in the 1910s when Weber was writing, the 20s, those people wanted to have equal treatment before the law. And that was equality. I think Denmark has really achieved that as best any modern state can. I mean, obviously there are differences among individuals. But what we found, and this is a finding that's recurrent, was that even if you provide equal services on paper, families with different knowledge and families with different motivations for their children can make different use of those programs. And it's the role of the family, the sorting, the information, that part is completely neglected. And I think that's powerful. And that's one of the most neglected features of even the child development literature. When you look at it, you'll look at Vygotsky. Vygotsky's talking about the growth of neurons. Not that many people, some for sure are doing it, but not that many people are looking at how these families are providing opportunities for children inside a larger opportunity space. And so we find in New York, Chris Walters, and New Jersey, not community colleges, but colleges that have to do with charter schools and with other kinds of selective education, that schools that are targeted towards disadvantaged children have the following feature: that whatever level of disadvantage you state as the target, you always find that the most disadvantaged kids are the ones who benefit the most. And you always find that the ones who are taking the program are the most advantaged among the disadvantaged. And it's the parents at work. I don't know if you would contradict that. There's a lot of more Hermes in Germany. There are a lot of studies. Walters, I've collected now a whole catalog of these studies. And
I also have Dustman.
Dustman, exactly. The Dustman program in childcare in Germany, right?
Yeah.
And so these programs, and this, you see, it changes the way we think about government. It changes the way we think about policy. I don't want to say government's evil or government's good, and it's not the point of view. It's that offering a program is not enough. It's the engagement of the family with the program and with the child. That's the whole story. And then you might ask, do I need what is it about the program that is most productive? And what is it that we can do? And that's why I'm so enthusiastic about the idea of parenting, engaging parenting. So I've been absorbed in this in China and in Jamaica and now in the United States. But we're still at the beginning, like Rasmus was saying earlier. We don't have full knowledge, even though I can give you names of people who will tell you the way, the truth, and the light, and you must come to my institute and wear a nurse's uniform or do something. No, they can do that. That's their life. They can do whatever they want. But I think the structure is deeper than that. So that's the point.
Yeah, and I'll go back to that in a second. But maybe just to go back to your work on Denmark and maybe delve in a little bit deeper into that. What you mentioned is basically parents having the sort of agency to sort into different places, and that also what came about in your research, if I'm not mistaken, is that there was sorting in terms of teachers in Denmark. And even though there was equal offering in terms of like free education for everyone, teachers still sorted to different neighborhoods that had
But their
in a way
pay
better
was the
students,
different neighborhoods,
and
right?
they're paying the same. But that I was
Yeah.
wondering if you can go into that a little bit more.
Yeah, no, this is something
Rasmus.
that, well, he should go, he's the Dane here. I'm simply the outsider looking in here. But the thing that's impressive is that teacher salaries are equal. You see, there's this whole literature. The education schools and the so-called education economists in the United States and the world emphasize pay teachers more, do this for qualifications, and on and on and on. But what we found is these schools are equally funded by the state, and the teachers are equally paid in all schools. But what's happening is the schools still operate in neighborhood catchment areas. So what happens is families sort, and the sorting creates peer effects among the parents. It also creates peers of children who are going to these schools who have highly motivated parents. And one of the findings from this work that we've been doing is showing that how parents pick the neighborhoods in which they go, in which they live, in which they spend most of the time for their children. They can be bumped out of it by bad economic circumstance, that's for sure. But what happens is those kids get into those neighborhoods, and the better neighborhoods they stay in. But the better neighborhoods are also the better schools, better houses, better teachers. And the teachers, even though they get paid a penny more, will want to go there because they have these highly motivated parents and highly motivated teachers supporting them. Anybody who's ever taught knows how horrible it is to have a student who doesn't care or parents who don't care. But when you have kids who care, it's like it can be a real pleasure to be a teacher. And I think that's part of what's going on in Denmark. I mean, Rasmus can.
Yeah, I think that what we can also use, I mean, the Danish data for, is basically characterizing these trajectories across the life cycle. It's not only that you're thrown off from the moon and then you drop down into a neighborhood. It's basically, I mean, sorting trajectories that we can see starting already before parents have their first child, and then they, I mean, gradually kind of move into different neighborhoods, and then finally, when the children are attending school, they kind of sort into sort of the final destination. So, and I think that that's probably going on in, I would say, every country, to some degree at least. We just have the data to document it in Denmark, and I think we still have to grasp exactly the process of it and how that's affecting skill formation and affecting inequality on a broader basis. But clearly we can see the patterns. So people live sort of in relatively similar areas before they have children, irrespective of the educational level. And then once they have children, they just fan out across the education spectrum, with the most highly educated, the most affluent living in the affluent areas, and the most disadvantaged for the lowest education living in the most disadvantaged areas.
And I think it's important what we discussed before, that they act on their agency to do that they sort because they want to.
There's a literature that's out there promoted by the New York Times and by a lot of foundations, places like Gates and so forth, that I think are very harmful in the sense they read the New York Times every morning and they fund the latest headline or something. That's fine. You know, as Benjamin Franklin once said, a fool and his money are easily parted. So let Gates waste his money as he wishes. But I think the crucial thing is to understand that the neighborhood is a family investment. Families are who choose neighborhoods. Now, some neighborhoods are less. If you're extremely poor, you pick a neighborhood where you can live. And so this leads to very bad neighborhoods. I found out yesterday that in Denmark, they call the very poorest neighborhood the thumb. It's the thumb of the hand, but it's a local name. But there really is a lot of sorting because the property rights, it's low, everything is, the rents are low, it's cheap living. But what happens, so there is a question, poverty does matter. I'm not saying it doesn't matter. But what I do say is that the role of the family in picking the neighborhood, and the role of the family in supporting the school, and the role of the family in providing this kind of support for the child and the school, and the role of the family in interacting with each other. You know, like Hillary Clinton, to quote her now, in a more constructive role, and that is to say, she wrote this book, It Takes a Village, and she meant it, and it was good. She's really talking about how these peer communities mutually support thriving of the children who grow up in those neighborhoods. And I think that's something we don't think of enough. But it's partly a functioning of the free market. And I don't want to say the free market should be shut down. It's partly a major investment that parents make is buying a house and buying it in a neighborhood. And right now, that's treated as something that's off in the corner there, house and urban development and totally different department and housing. We worry about toilets and sanitation and lead in the water. All those are not, I'm not saying those aren't important, but the crucial thing is the parents are picking this package: neighborhood, peers, schools, and supporting the schools. And nobody's putting that together except us, at least right now.
But I think that also goes to another important aspect. And I mean, so you said that now there's the free market and free housing market. I mean, Denmark also has a free housing market, and parents can then sort by housing prices and so forth. But of course, I mean, there are policies that could try to address that. But some of these policies that may, I mean, well, that's something you want is a subjective question, and I guess we're not the ones as researchers to say that policymakers should do this and you should do that because that's the right thing. I mean, that's up for individuals to choose. Similarly, in terms of transfer rates and redistribution of income, I mean, it doesn't take many minutes walking down the street in the US and versus walking down the street in Copenhagen to notice that the income distribution is quite different in the countries. Particularly the sort of the lower tail of the income distribution is different in the US than it is in Denmark. But whether that's right or whether that's fair, I mean, that's not for us to judge, and it's not for me to judge, I would say, as a researcher. But I guess what I hope our objective is to understand how that then shapes individuals' opportunities and individuals' lives. And then it's up for the policymakers to decide what to do about it and how to act upon it.
But I think key in any kind of effective solution, I would add, maybe we differ. We don't march in lockstep anyway. So that's the point of scholarship, is we bump against each other and trade views. But I would say at the core of this, I think, is having the family and the society in which the family is embedded interacting mutually in a constructive way and disagreeing, and at the same time reinforcing the well-being of their children. And I just think the current policy environment segregates different aspects of human development in a very unhealthy way, and then doesn't recognize the importance of these choices that the families make and the investments made in the children for everything that happens the rest of the way in the life of the person and the neighborhood, for that.
That sense also how they help develop the skills children need when they're growing up to then enter a labor market, and how that labor market is structured in the different places. So that's
exactly.
also
and even something as basic as civility. And by civility, I mean cooperation. There's an emerging literature here. People are thinking it's brand new that interpersonal skills are important. I think anybody who ever managed a company would know that, but that's another point. The fact is that the interpersonal skills and the ability to cope with each other, but other skills too, those skills we can produce. And so that's another whole other development. But the family is still as a matrix. It's a forming matrix where these skills are developed and shaped, and that attitudes and approaches are developed in a way that encourage engagement and growth of the child and of the family and of the society. So I think we need to emphasize that much more, including something going beyond saying that somehow neighborhoods are destiny. There's been a code word around here that a lot of people pick up from the New York Times saying zip code is destiny. And we have zip code and super zip code data, way detailed data, more than zip codes in Denmark. And data and neighborhoods matter. These disaggregated neighborhoods matter. But what matters about them, I think, most is the parents and the environments they shape together. It's the assortment of parents together. It's their social interaction. and the building of a community that I think matters.
Yeah.
Because the neighborhood made out of the people living there.
Exactly.
It's
Yeah.
not bringing the water.
It's not in
Yeah.
the water. Exactly. And it's the
Yeah.
institutions as well, because
Mhm.
the people help make the institution. You can see some of these very successful neighborhoods in Chicago. We have some, we're here speaking from the South Side. South Side, remember, there was a song written years ago by a guy named Brown, I think it was. The South Side of Chicago is the meanest part of town, or something like that. But it can be tough. But the point is that even these very tough neighborhoods, you see islands of families and neighborhoods which are mutually supportive, protective of the children, successful in placing children and going forward. I mean, one of the most successful products of the South Side of Chicago, as a black man, it's primarily black, is Glenn Lowry, who's now at Brown, who's was educated at MIT and Northwestern and spent time at Harvard and now is at Brown. But people like Lowry are not that unusual. And they came from those middle class environments, those
Mhm.
environments that were protective. So in the midst of all this crime and violence, there were enclaves of protection. And I think that's something to really keep in mind.
Yes, and I think that that's part of also that what matters for the economics of flourishing is are those narratives that through agency things are possible, that you can overcome barriers, but I think a lot of the narratives currently sort of push in the direction that's no, there's nothing you can do, the system's against you, or there's too many barriers against you. But there's always that sense of agency of people can able to either soar or look for opportunities and overcome barriers, at least in what I see in the United States.
Yeah, but see, this is the thing that really, as an American looking at this, I've studied this whole question about the economic progress of blacks. I haven't studied it recently because it's so controversial. I don't want to get involved in it anymore. But in the early part of my career, I looked at the civil rights laws, and I looked at the economic progress of blacks in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And the thing that was amazing and really important is how rapid black economic progress was. And that when the laws that prohibited their entry into civil life and into firms, literally laws that forbade them to be employed in factories and so forth, when those laws were repealed and it's completely made illegal, they prospered mightily. And in fact, if you go back even more 100 years before, right after the Civil War, when there was no education level for blacks, the level of education in the face of true resistance to having blacks educated in the South, their educational progress is pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing. It's a sign of their ability, their tenacity, their encouragement. I was recently listening to this, again, I don't know if you know this, there's a famous opera by Scott Joplin called Tremonisha. Do you know this?
No.
Tremonisha is a story about a black girl in Arkansas in the 1880s. She's growing up in this rural area, and she's growing up with all the ignorance. They're practicing voodoo. They're putting curses on people. And all Tremonisha wants to do is go to school. She wants to learn, and she does. And it's a story of triumph and engagement and an aspiration. And the aspiration was pretty remarkable. So for somebody saying you can't succeed, it's amazing. Even by 1950, which is there's a lot of Jim Crow going on in 1950. Black economic progress had been real. And when the market barriers were eliminated completely, they prospered. They prospered at least until the 70s. And then the question of skill structure in the U.S. economy began to weigh against them. That's another whole discussion. But nonetheless, the growth was amazing. So that's why the idea that somehow these barriers are permanent and we're all innately racist and so forth is such a negative perspective. I don't believe it. I don't believe it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we're innately racist. I really don't. You see such progress, even think about how in the middle of the South in the 1920s, or in Atlanta, say in 1930, the number of black people who could go and get a Coca-Cola at a drugstore, at a regular drug, couldn't get in. They were black, couldn't sit at the counter. All of that's gone. And with it, I think, is the structure of, I'm not saying that there's full integration, but I think there's a tremendous amount of progress that people don't accept, don't admit.
And then we can have even more, yes, they can still.
Yeah, I know. So the idea of there's somehow barriers that can't be overcome, I really resist that, because there's so many affluent African-American people, children who've gone to good schools, who are doing well, who have good careers, who are contributors to society in every way, whether it's driving a bus, whether it's teaching philosophy, whether or not it's writing novels, whether or not it's playing sports. And their contribution is rich. And I think the negativism there, this is truly, I hope this is a passing phase. I hope it is.
No, I think we should maybe obviously do more to highlight those positives and highlight the things that still need to be.
I wish that Black History Month would have a few more celebrations of the achievements. And there are a lot of them to celebrate. It's not like blacks did nothing. Blacks did a tremendous amount. In fact, in macroeconomics today, one of the founding documents in mathematics is work on dynamic programming by a mathematician named Blackwell. He was a black man who grew up in what was an underground railway town in Illinois. He grew up there in the 20s and 30s, and he did fundamental work. He was educated at the University of Illinois. He suffered initially a lot of discrimination, but then at the end of his life, he was a celebrated scholar at Berkeley. And his work undergirds a huge amount of work in macroeconomics today. They'll see themselves as part of the Bellman equation, and the Blackwell's theorem are just central. And there are many other such scholars. So anyway,
that's a great
we're getting
story.
way off Denmark.
Way off Denmark, but just maybe to realize back, that's a great story about Blackwell. Just to realize back going back to some of we're discussing that there's no specific, that we have some ingredients, that we know some things, and you were discussing, Jim, about some programs that you have studied, and maybe Rasmus, you can weigh in terms of anything that you've seen in Denmark as well. But if there's any, like, from the features of some of these programs that you've analyzed, is there any like 2 or 3 sort of key early childhood or parental engagement features or tools or things that you've seen that have the most impact? Either you had a lot of you did a lot of work, I think, on home visitation programs. Is it that's one key tool or intervention? Is it more reading? Just as you said, just spending more time engaged with your kids in any activity. What are some of the things that you've seen as features of some of these programs that you seen have more impact?
Well, it comes back to what I was saying about engagement and attachment. I think the one thing that I found, and in this paper with Jorge that we recently finished and published, what we found is, going across a whole series of interventions, the universal constant in all the successful interventions, and by successful, I mean interventions where we actually studied this intervention by a randomized assignment. We had long-term follow-up, unlike the 6-month or 8-month follow-ups that are so typical in a lot of fields. This went long-term because we're interested in people long-term. We're not interested in whether or not the kid is better off 8 months from now. We want to know if the kid is better off 25 years from now. And we can do that with some of these programs. So when we studied programs that had that long-run feature, what we found that was very, very interesting, and what was most interesting, was that those programs that engaged the parents and that changed the nature of parenting in the family, that altered it, that seemed to boost it upward, had the biggest effects. And the thing that staggered me, and this is something that I find, I got carried away. We had a conference here last November, and one of the graduate students kind of lampooned me. I got carried away. I said, I felt like Madame Curie and discovering radium. But I think I do in this regard. We got closer and closer to realizing the parenting role was the ever-present ingredient. It's like, what caused these photographic plates to darken, and, what was going on with this pitch blende, and Curie finally analyzed it down to radium. I would say the early childhood version of radium is parenting. Engaging the parents and getting the parents to scaffold in the way I described earlier. I really think that, and the thing that staggered me was that we actually have parenting programs that work, that only visit families 1 hour every week, or in Jamaica, 1 hour every 2 weeks. There's a program engaged in China now, in rural China, which is 1 hour a week. In Tibet now, we have a program. And then in Xinjiang, we have a program. But the structure of those programs is, it's really very interesting. The structure is such that that 1 hour engages the parent in the life of the child. The parent's there, or the caregiver is there. And what that leads to is a very active, engaged child. So 1 hour a week, or 1 hour every 2 weeks in Ireland. And those are producing impacts on attachment and growth of skills that are of the order of magnitude similar to the much more intensive programs. Things like preschool and ABC, and that I also find staggering. And I think the reason why that works is the parents are there all the time. When the parents learn how to deal with the child and encourage the child, it's like having teaching 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
And that kind of engagement. So I think that would be the one thing I personally believe. It's an hypothesis. It's not confirmed as airtight as possible. But I swear that I keep finding it everywhere. And of course, maybe I'm just obsessed with it and looking for it everywhere. There's a danger. No. There's a real danger in that. I know that. But also, I think that the structure and then understanding that early childhood is not education in the usual sense. Because many people talk about preschool, and so as if, these are like little Einsteins or little whatever. They're going to enroll in class and write their lessons on the desk. No, you want them to play these kinds of notions of interaction and social engagement with the teacher, with each other. And there are programs that encourage older children to play with younger children, Montessori, for example, or Reggio. And the virtue of those programs is the older child learns something by teaching the younger child something, and the younger child generally adores the older child. That's a phenomenon you all know, all parents know. And you can bring that together. So it's not just solitary parent on child, but forming groups also can be very productive. But as Rasmus was saying earlier, we're at the beginning of our understanding.
But I would say that also, in terms of engaging parents and programs towards parents, a real challenge is that parents, obviously all parents want to do the best for their children, and I mean, there's a danger of antagonizing parents in the way that becomes sort of, if you're trying to educate them and pushing them away, even though that you mean well, in terms of programs. And I think that, Denmark has a long-standing program in terms of home visits of just after birth from health nurses, going back to the 1930s, and it has been evaluated by a university professor at University of Copenhagen and co-authors. And the program was actually introduced, I think, by a U.S. philanthropist, Rockefeller, I believe. No, Rockefeller.
Rockefeller.
Yeah.
I don't know that program.
No, but it's universal in Denmark today, and it still stands. So, and whether you're high or low in society, a healthcare nurse enters your home just after your child is born, and then assesses the child's weight, so how's breastfeeding going, how do you feel about having a child, so depression symptoms and so forth. And that is a program that's really succeeded in sort of engaging in parents and not sort of pushing parents away. Don't feel sort of any pressure in terms of that now someone's going to come and judge you and say that you're a bad parent or whatever.
Yeah, right.
So I think that is a real challenge in terms of programs towards parents.
See, the programs that I was talking about, though, in every case has exactly the ingredient that Rasmus was talking about. And like the ones in China and in Jamaica and the ones here in the U.S. now built off of them have had the feature that the visitors, the home visitors who come in and instruct the parents are not much different from the parents themselves. And it's not coercive. It's not like they're coming in with a lesson and saying, look, you idiot, we are from a superior race of human beings and We're going to tell you what to do. Not at all. They're typically mothers. It's usually a mother, but often, sometimes not a mother, but usually it's a mother. And it's mothers who basically, women who are like the same education and the same background, and frequently from the same village. And with it, then no coercion. And really accepting the mother as it is, but just suggesting you might do this. This is really helpful to the child. And, Flavio Cunha's work, for example, at Rice, really shows that some very, very uneducated women and women from certain kinds of social strata really don't know their own value. They really don't know that people are talking about mindset, whether the child can, think the child can learn. I think there's another version of something like mindset. It's not the child learning, it's the parent learning. Maybe you want to call it parent set. The parents are learning how powerful they are and how constructive they can be. And to many, it's an epiphany. They really suddenly realize something they never knew before. And they engage as a result of it.
Yeah.
So,
it's amazing.
well, at least in the Danish data from surveys, we see that it's not sort of a binary. It's gradual. So if you an affluent, high resource family, then you have, great. I would say, you're very conscious of your own importance in terms of children's lives. Whereas if you've gone through school and everything was one defeat after the other, and and every lesson you failed and so forth. If your children are then facing problems, then then I guess it's easy to think that, well, that's just the way the world is, right? It was that way for me, and so now it's that way for my children. There's nothing to do about it. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling kind of spiral that just keeps on generation after generation.
But they can be broken. See, the thing that I found interesting, and I find this really interesting. I don't know if I showed you these results. Orla Doyle has been doing some work in the slums of Dublin. So her kids are now 14-year-olds. It's a home visiting program, very similar to what program I described. And then we have program from Jamaica. And what we found, and this is true of other programs as well, very strong pattern of heritability between the parent's IQ and the child's IQ. Well, that pattern is found in the control group of these home visiting programs. There's almost no relationship among the treatment group. Once these kids get into these home visiting programs, you break these kind of traditional link. It's staggering how high it is. I don't know if I showed you these results. They're really staggering. And so we can think about the IQ link. See, right now, in terms of the discussion about all of these issues, I remember talking to a reporter from the Wall Street Journal recently, and we got off on various subjects. And the Wall Street Journal is entranced with Charles Murray and hereditarianism, and they think they know. They have a cast of familiar characters, and Murray is one of them. And I think Murray's done some very good work, so I'm not going to say he's terrible or anything. But again, they don't really understand how skills are formed. And that's the part that literally we're not born with an IQ that's immutable. We're not born with a personality that's immutable. We're not born with a civility that's immutable. And I still think that's the prevailing view in many parts of society, even highly educated society. They would say, there's another view, of course, which is the Jacobin vision, which is that the world can be remade overnight. Today we'll be men, tomorrow we'll be women, and on and on and on. That kind of extreme view is prevalent in some quarters. But I think the truth is that we can do something about the skills. Yeah, we do have there is genetic component to things, but it's far from determinative. And I think it's very frustrating to me that these shibboleths, these kinds of beliefs that are so deeply embedded, still affect policy. So if you ask these look at how old is the Senate, U.S. Senate? Forget about Biden and but people like McCulloch is 84, 85. Most of these people are, the argument is made, that the last thing that any of these guys ever learned was the last lesson they took in college. And then They've been with those lessons for the last 50 or 60 years. But I think a lot of public policy thinking is frozen. And these lessons have to be taught or have to
Yeah.
be at least explained. But they're not.
Yeah, and that's a thing, a good segue. We're almost out of time here, but that's a thing, a good segue for my last question, which listening to this last part, what you were saying, Jim, about all these lessons, that I think it's also an opportunity to revisit or highlight some of this research, highlight a lot of this work, and have more young people, young scholars in their beginning of their careers, or other maybe even established scholars going back and looking at this and trying to venture into this field and sort of trying to go to the root causes of some of these issues. So in sort of my last question is, and more of a statement from you, from both of you, to close us off, if you have any message about the fields of economic of human flourishing, social mobility, and equality you think people should be paying more attention to, should be more engaged with, or in that sense, any advice for young scholars who are maybe starting their careers and maybe are fearful to venture into these fields, but you see opportunities for them to work on different areas that would be helpful for them in their careers, but also more helpful for society to enable more human flourishing. Maybe we'll start with you, Rasmus.
Yeah. So I think that well, one personal lesson, going back to our initial meeting and first results, is that I think that one should engage critically in dogmas and question things. So it may not. I mean, it may be sort of an accepted truth, but it may not be the case. That's the way, and it's. I mean, yeah. So that and I think that's, I guess, ultimately part of, I guess, progress also in terms of science and so forth. That you keep questioning things and then you keep evolving. Yeah. I would say one aspect which we haven't really covered, but I still find intriguing also, is the interplay between public and parental environments, in the sense that, so we may see one policy being enacted at a school or a preschool level or a nursery level, but of course, I mean, parents are not ignorant to that, and some parents may think that, okay, now we kind of enforce whatever's been done there. Others may think, well, that's all good, now I don't have to do it anymore. So it may be complements and maybe substitutes for different types of parents, and understanding how that either closes gaps or perhaps also increases gaps between children and their possibilities. I mean, that's to me also a really intriguing question.
Excellent. Yeah.
Well, I think the one advice that, I mean, I kind of give a contrarian advice in some ways, and maybe a little bit of pessimism. I honestly believe, like Rasmus was saying, that knowledge progresses by debate, confrontation, exchange, and that's how we grow. That's how we actually learn from each other. I mean, I can't tell you how different my worldview is than when I was 15 years old. I just had different experiences. I met different people, and the world has changed. I can remember back that time. But I also think that it's very difficult sometimes in academia and in society at large to engage in open and honest debate. People will not debate. I mean, in the U.S. context now, the hysteria that goes over just the political rancor that's going on now forbids. I mean, literally, look at Biden. I don't want to attack Biden one way or the other, but it's so silly. Biden, in his State of the Union address, used the word illegal about an illegal alien. The guy was illegal. He broke the law. But I don't care. It's not the point. The point is that all these people attacked him because he had used the word illegal. He should have used the word newcomer. He should have used the word undocumented. You say, wait a minute. If we're at the level where look, everybody understood what he meant. There was a certain group of people who came without documents. They were newcomers, and the whole issue is, well, should we have them or not? That's a debate I don't want to get into. But what Biden was doing was just using a word which everybody understood and was not in any sense offensive. I mean, he didn't intend it offensively. And yet the polarization that came up about that disturbs me greatly. People are going on how, oh, look at this. He was using the word illegal. He doesn't like the immigrants. And he did nothing about Biden. So I'm not saying I love Biden or hate Biden, but I think what's happened is that the ability of the society to disagree has weakened considerably.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure. I mean, in academia, the power of networks is overwhelming now. And networks essentially help. They fuel the careers of young academics. You get plugged into a network. The network has certain values. The network supports you. The networks will attack you if you're outside the network. And it creates a kind of segregation of ideas that's unhealthy. I mean, I'm not saying this is new, though. Think about the whole discussion of back in the 1960s and 70s about Keynesian macroeconomics and monetary policy. So you had the Friedmanites and you had the Keynesians, and a lot of these people wouldn't talk to each other then. They don't talk to each other now, although not those particular people.
Mm-hmm.
The arguments changed, and so I think everything in the society, we know that what creates growth is, it's like, in some sense, we know that some of the most powerful ideas have emerged from these conflict of cultures, the interface, people who just are new to each other, learning from each other, and then drawing lessons from each other. And that activity is so heavily discouraged now. So I would say find yourself, express yourself in a way, and find environments where you can do that kind of activity. And I don't think it's universally true. I mean, I happen to be in a university environment where it's pretty free in that regard. There's still networks. But I think in general, there's a tremendous amount of conformity and fear, like you were saying. People don't want to talk about the family. They don't. And when they talk about blacks these days, they almost always have to equate disparity between a black and a white and discrimination, even though the two involve totally different things. Facts about their outcomes and intentionality about their treatment, but nobody wants to discuss it that way.
Mhm.
And it leads to these outcries, and people are being crucified, literally, in the middle of this, being ruined academically for expressing views that are very, very, very mild and encouraging this open discovery. So it's saying, I don't believe this. For example, there was a case that was recently made here, even here at the university lab school, where a child who was in lab school, one of my colleagues told me this, was told they were discussing discrimination against blacks. And they were saying whites discriminate against blacks. And that was the lesson, and so forth and so on. And then a white student in the class, made the remark in class that blacks could discriminate against whites too, couldn't they? And the kid was sent to the principal's office. And the point is that's such an unreasonable response. We're talking about discrimination. People have discrimination left and right, red, yellow, black, doesn't matter. And yet the fact is the society didn't tolerate that. Tolerate, which is a legitimate question. I mean, and again, it could lead to a really good discussion about what we mean by discrimination or not. So I think the way to proceed is to try to find zones of tolerance where you can discuss things, and then find people who you don't agree with. I mean, my own personal experience has been I've learned the most from people I violently disagreed with initially. Violently. I thought we're idiots or didn't know anything. My late wife, for example, I didn't think she was an idiot, but she was a sociologist. And I was an economist. And I said, what a weakling she is. No mathematics, nothing. Then as I talked with her, I started reading her books. I started reading her journals. I began to realize this is a powerful body of ideas, which I really hadn't known, and enriched me. So I think you've got to make yourself open to something new. You've really got to make yourself open, but in a way that you're not completely open. I mean, if you become completely, invaded and just kind of taken over by whatever thought is in the moment, then that's
Mhm.
no good either. But the
Mhm.
debates, I completely agree with Rasmus. I think that the debating, the exchange has to be there. I've
Mhm.
learned a tremendous amount. I learned from people telling me that I'm wrong,
Mhm.
and I've been wrong a lot of times, and I think that's so powerful.
Yeah.
It really is. And But my being wrong and then understanding why it was wrong and then fixing it is a very personally satisfying experience, but it's very elevating. I can learn from that. And I think that's the kind of excitement that everybody should encourage. But there is somehow out there in the society these forces that are leading towards silence. There's a whole group of people who just won't. I remember, without mentioning names, I remember giving a workshop years ago at the National Bureau, and it was a model that I had with two scholars. One was Chris Tabor, another one was Lance Lochner. Both of them have done very well in their careers. And it was a general equilibrium model of the U.S. economy. And it was something that wasn't that much done in labor economics. So we had a closed system, we had investment in human capital, we had a bunch of features. And there was this group out there that, this the facts, man, we must stay on course. And literally the group, when our paper was announced, the group got up and left the room. I remember Chris was a young graduate student at the time, and he was mortified. I've been around longer, so I'm used to this. But what I'm saying is the very act of intolerance like that. Not everybody left the room. A lot of people said we got good comments and so forth. But this idea, or at least people coming in, and then a speaker comes into your place, and you turn your back to the speaker during the lecture. I mean, come on, you can hear the person out. And it's that kind of intolerance that seems to be growing that I really, it frightens me actually as an academic, because a lot of it's growing in academic circles. It really is. They're not tolerant of each other. They're just dismissing each other's points of view, saying it's nonsense, it's crazy. And I don't think that's brand new, but I do think that it maybe has gotten more intense recently, and people are very powerfully networked, and they see things as more of a career game than as a career that's actually changing the world and fixing up ideas. So that's the negative part of my story, that I see people so blind in pursuing their career that they give up pursuing knowledge. And I think that's a huge mistake.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I think this is something that bothers me. But I think there are places out there where you can try. There are still tolerant zones, at least I think, right? I don't know. How is it in Denmark? A lot of intolerance too?
Not in the way you describe it, though. I don't know. But for sure, I mean, it's...
But the Danes are very quiet people. They don't... I remember once I gave a lecture in Aarhus, at an inaugural lecture at a center, and I told everybody not to be too Danish. And by that I meant, because Danes are very cooperative. They're very nice with each other. They're polite. Americans are not. They're very blunt. And I'm probably among the bluntest of the Americans. So I have a quality that sets people's teeth on edge at times. But it's in the spirit of challenging ideas.
Engagement.
It's not, I don't care if they agree with me or disagree. I just want to hear a good argument. And I can tell you, there have been environments that I've been in. I've been very happy where people have had that. Not pleasant. It's not pleasant because people are out with a hatchet and they'll chop you down if you don't have a good idea. But on the other hand, they will give you a lot of other good ideas and say, have you thought of it this way? Have you thought of it that way? And if you do have that, it can be powerfully stimulating for both the person making the comment and the person getting the comment. So that's what I think intellectual activity is about. And I must say, things have become more gentle. Workshops have calmed down. You wouldn't even recognize what looks like workshops from the 1960s and 70s. People were out there pretty violent, to put it mildly, but verbally violent, and sometimes physically violent too. Arm wrestling and throwing things at each other.
Among academics,
they took the ideas seriously, though. They really took them seriously, and as a result, they really wanted to get the point across. And I think that's the part of engagement that's so important. So I would say engage. Engage with everything, but in particular, engage with ideas and life, and for that matter, art. I mean, even though I'm not much of an artist and I don't really have deep understanding of art, I would still try to So I just think it's kind of being alive.
Mhm.
But we went back to the question of human flourishing at the beginning.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think that's part of human flourishing, is you engage with what you're with.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're dead. It's like if you're no different from a bottle of water. You're just kind of sitting there, and you're not alive. You're not feeling. You're not expressing. You're not digesting. You're not learning.
Yeah.
And I think, but I'm lucky because I'm in an occupation and in a place where I can do that. I'm paid to do it, more or less.
Yeah.
Maybe
And I
not
think
too much of it.
yeah. Yeah. But I think the main point that you're making applies to many other professions or life in general. There's a
Yes.
flourishing that you exercise your agency to take action, to
You
engage
take
with the
action,
world,
but you engage others. And sometimes
engage others.
I
Yes.
will disagree with people only to get a good argument back about why the counter argument's wrong. I mean,
Yes.
Rasmus and I have just been engaged in revising a paper, and I try to play devil's advocate in every paper I write. I consider the worst possible argument against the paper that I can think of. I'm limited, obviously. And a lot of people don't like that. Maybe he doesn't like that.
That's engagement and scholarship progress.
Well, it's really considering that it's not antagonism. It's not paranoia. It's trying to. Friedman had this. There's a quote that's put up every once in a while on campus here in Chicago, and it's Friedman talking about debating somebody on a point. Friedman was a great debater. You love to debate. Very quick on his feet. Very, very perceptive. Very cutting sometimes if he had to be. But what he said was, if you're debating somebody, make sure you understand the argument that he's making better than he does. That was the idea.
Yeah.
That you literally could take the position of your opponent and understood where he came from or she came from, and then reflect your own argument to really put yours in context with where it goes.
Yeah.
I think that's a hard thing to do, but it's important.
Yeah.
Say,
Hard thing to do.
What's that?
Yeah, no, as I said, yeah, it's a hard thing to do for sure, but it needs to be done. Yeah.
But it's the way to learning. I think it's the way to being alive.
Well, we're coming on time
Yeah,
now.
wait. My 30 minutes long gone.
No worries. I just want to be mindful for your of your time as well.
Well, we're working on a paper, so we've got to work hard tonight. We'll stay late, right?
Well, thank you very much, Jim and Rasmus, for engaging with me in the sharing your work. I think sharing messages that I think younger scholars or more established scholars should go and discuss facts, discuss some of the root causes of some of the issues that we see around social mobility and human flourishing, both in the United States, in Denmark, and in other places. And I just wanted to thank you for your time.
Okay,
and
well,
hopefully this leads to more work around the economics of human flourishing and trying to get to the root causes of these debates.
I hope so. Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Perfectus podcast. It's been a pleasure to dive into the fascinating world of the economics of human flourishing with our esteemed guests. As we continue this series, we look forward to exploring more about how markets and institutions not only support, but also enhance our social mobility and overall well-being. Remember to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform so you don't miss an episode. And for more insights, be sure to visit us at the Archbridge Institute and check out Perfectus magazine. We're excited to bring you more conversations that bridge the gap between economics and the pursuit of human flourishing. Thank you once again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.